Hola, mi nombre es Lorena Espinosa, pertenezco al grupo de Dreamers Moms. Fui casada con un ciudadano norteamericano que estuvo en la militar, en los marines, y lo mandaron a hacer un año en Okinawa. Yo viví en Okinawa un año y tengo 2 hijos ciudadanos norteamericanos y ahorita estamos metiendo la petición para migración. Y yo trabajo en una fábrica, pero la verdad no gano mucho, entonces sí necesito mucha ayuda para que yo pueda pagar el abogado y yo poder regresar a Estados Unidos.
Good night. Muy buenas noches. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this very special webcast presented to you by Global Exchange. We're streaming live this Zoom conversation on Global Exchange, Global Exchange's Facebook. We welcome everyone who's watching us on Facebook, on YouTube. We welcome everyone. Muy buenas noches. Bienvenidos a este conversatorio especial presentado por Global Exchange. Estamos transmitiendo en vivo en la página de Global Exchange en español. Global Exchange en español, that's the name of the page. We have 2 pages, Global Exchange and Global Exchange en español. The Spanish version will be on Global Exchange en español. If you're joining us on Zoom, we ask you to select your preferred language. If I'm not mistaken, it's on the bottom right of your panel. And si tú estás escuchando esto en español, if you're interested in listening in Spanish, please go to Global Exchange en español or YouTube. Listo. Bienvenidos. Welcome to this very special conversation when we're going to reflect on the political perspectives, and we're going to go deep into the analysis on what we have in front of us in the face of a new administration in the United States that has generated a lot of expectations with different promises and executive actions, but we still have to see a lot. And so we're going to hear from those who are in Washington, we're going to hear from specialists, and we're going to listen to the voices of those impacted by this for 4 years or some of the most terrible anti-immigrant policies. Let me start by introducing you and welcome everyone. You just heard the voice of one of the moms from Deported Moms in Tijuana, who shared with us her story. Acabamos de escuchar una historia de una de las mamás de Deported Moms. And now joining us for this amazing panel, we want to welcome Daniela Burgui Palomino, Latin American Working Group, and welcome, Dani, welcome, Daniela. We want to welcome Tran Dang from the Rhizome Center for Migrants. Hi, welcome. Hi, Jill, welcome from Otros Dreams and Acción. Welcome, Professor Bill Hing, University of San Francisco. It's an honor and privilege always to have you, Professor. We're also welcoming Cesar Vega, welcome. Also from the Rhizome Center for Migrants, and Cecilia joining us from Illinois, if I am not mistaken. That's where she should be there now. And And so let's get started. Let's open the space by acknowledging the stories of those who've been impacted by the policies that have affected everyone in the past 4 years. So please, Cecilia, let's start by listening to what you want to share with us. Why don't you please share with us your experience as a woman, as a mother affected by the current immigration system in the next 5 minutes.
Hi, yes. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me. Yes, so in 2012, very briefly, what we thought was a typical day, my husband called me. Till this day, I can't recall what I was making for dinner, but he said, I'm on my way home. I'll see you soon. Hours passed, and I got a call, collect call from the Evergreen Police Department. He told me he had been pulled over.
Can you hear us, Cecilia? We should probably wait for her to get some better connection. Oh, let me see. Yeah, Cecilia, we're back.
Okay,
you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, no.
We can hear you now. We can hear you now. Okay. Cesar, please, let's move while we wait for her. Cesar, please also share with us your experience and your analysis of what is happening right now. And what do you think about what's happening right now at the political level? Cecilia, we're going to wait for you. And after Cesar, we can get back to you.
Okay, so right now, basically, we have what's called the American Right to Family. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, and we're trying to create a bill to bring back those who have been deported. So as an American citizen, that's what we want. There is talk about an immigration plan, but we want to ensure that they include the deported who was under the Obama administration. We got to remember that he was a deporter in chief. So that's what we're asking for, to bring back those who have especially ties with American citizen families here, because we are also affected by family separations, not just at the border.
Thank you very much for sharing your story, Cecilia. And we know that you're not the only one. That there are hundreds of thousands of mothers who have been separated, who are waiting for a chance to bring their family back together. And we are with you. Thank you very much. Cesar, please tell us what's your experience and what's your analysis and what is happening right now.
Hi, well, first of all, thank everyone for watching. Thank you guys for having me. My name is Cesar. I am a formerly undocumented organizer from California. Was undocumented for 25 years in the state of California, lived through the Pete Wilson years, lived through the Sensenbrenner years, and later the movement that would emerge as a response. I came back to Guadalajara in 2018. Given the political climate, I had sort of reached my limit in terms of what I was willing to wait around for the Congress to make up their mind, right? I got tired of living my life in 2-year legislative cycles. I want to take control back. Looking at the efforts now, one, I think it's remarkable. I think we're seeing the fruits of a lot of very difficult organizing work, of a lot of sacrifices that people have done. For the Senate and for Democrats to propose an immigration solution that doesn't also include billions, trillions of dollars for border enforcement, for mass incarceration, for the militarization and apartheid in immigrant communities along the border is remarkable. And that is because of the work that immigrant youth has done, particularly to push the envelope to say that we can push out private detention centers in the state of California. We can stop police-ICE collaboration. We can think of solutions and proposals that make our communities whole and keep us safe without also adding billions of dollars to these rogue agencies that have historically targeted our families. I think now, since my return to Mexico, it's been very emotional to see that people who've been deported, people who have chosen to return, are essentially still living as if they were undocumented, but now with the full benefit of, or what is supposed to be the full benefit of their citizenship. The opportunity has never been greater for us to address the historic harms of the Trump years, of the Obama years, of the Bush years, right? If we go back to 2001, when ICE was started. And that has to take place. As we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, we can't forget about the millions of people around the world who are essentially living lives in limbo, who are unable to make their families whole. And I think the pandemic has made this reality come close to, for a lot of people. That phenomenon of having to attend funerals through WhatsApp, through Skype, through Facebook Messenger has been the reality of our community for decades. We have the chance to bring people home, and we need to be bold. As advocates, we can't say that this is too big of an ask. We can't say that it's politically impossible. We have to insist that comprehensive means everyone. And we have to insist that family reunification means all families, not just those that are convenient, not just those that are fresh in our mind, but those who have fallen through the cracks and have been forgotten by a lot of folk.
Thank you. Very powerful, Cesar. And I mean, you're setting the tone for the conversation. And how, well, let's just go now and hear from Daniela, who is in Washington, who is in the front lines of the advocacy work on behalf of our communities. And Daniela, where are we standing right now in terms of the possibility of something real of a potential reform in the U.S. immigration system? How is this looking?
Yeah, thanks so much, Marco. And it's always a pleasure to be here with all of you. And thanks to those of you who are tuning in. I'm with the Latin America Working Group, or LOG. We're based in DC, but have been for over 30 years, mobilizing and educating and advocating for a more rights-based U.S. policy towards Latin America and the Caribbean. Something that's always difficult under any administration, but I think over the last 4 years was particularly difficult. And so as someone who has been in DC, well, really started my work in the region, working with civil society organizations in Mexico and Central America, but has been in DC, came into DC at the tail end of the Obama administration, and then worked for the last 4 years here when we were really kind of just reacting and trying to oppose and highlight the negative impacts of just all the devastating policies we were seeing for immigrant communities and for asylum seekers and migrants arriving to our border. I've had a series of emotions over the last few weeks, first 2 weeks of a new administration, ranging from, nerve-wracking in terms of the expectation of what's going to come out every day in terms of new announcements, how this is going to start looking and being implemented in the early days and what tone is going to be set, to hopeful, because I think there have been some, indications of, like Cesar said, a real change in rhetoric from what we were seeing at under the Trump administration, which of course was a really one of the worst moments in our history. Not just for the immigrant community, but also for other communities on the front lines of change and for racism in our country. And then I think a real level of anxiety and recognition that even though there's been general sort of high level, maybe first steps, the reality is that over the last 10 days, the lives of asylum seekers, migrants on the border, and immigrant communities in the US really hasn't changed. And so what we've seen in the last 10 days is high-level announcements, like Cesar said, of a proposed immigration bill, of which we still haven't seen the full text of, but that certainly we welcome those announcements about proposing a pathway to citizenship for DACA beneficiaries and for agricultural workers, for temporary status TPS beneficiaries. And so those are positive things that we're all going to be fighting for to move forward. But, you know, we've also seen a couple of executive orders that have also really tried to address some of the ways in which the Trump administration tried to destroy the asylum system. And again, we saw a number of policies being implemented at the border that really just push people away back into danger without any sort of processing. I think to levels that we hadn't really seen. And so we've seen there also too, some high level executive orders, basically with the intent to review those policies. We have not, and then we do have to say, we haven't yet seen the termination of the full termination of Remain in Mexico MPP, the Title 42 expulsions at the border, and the asylum cooperative agreements or the safe third country agreements with Central America. But just yesterday, we did get, you know, language that's instructed from the president, instructing agencies to really review these policies with a view to figuring out if they should be modified or terminated. So I think that language is positive, and we're sort of in that what's next phase where we're really anxious and trying to figure out, you know, push the administration to really send out what the next steps are, what are the implementation of these policies going to look like, especially with the executive orders. So I think that gets back to my, you know, anxiety of recognizing that we still have a long way to go. But these are good first steps. I think that outline a different vision from the one that we've all been living under. And just the last thing that I'll say is that I've been focusing a lot on U.S. immigration policy, but we know that both the immigration bill and the regional migration executive order yesterday both had components that more touch on U.S. foreign policy towards the region, especially towards Central America. And it is there that we are concerned about how that policy is going to be implemented with civil society organizations, and that we don't just see a return to Obama-era policies. I would say both on the immigration and the foreign policy, foreign assistance, injecting sort of large amounts of aid without really it going to the communities that need it the most on the ground. So I think I'll leave it there for now, a mix of hope, but really anxiety for the future, and knowing that there's still a lot of work to push the administration to really take advantage of this momentum. Like Cesar said, this is the time to be bold and not be shy about what we're asking for.
Thank you very much. Sounds great, but Jill, please tell us what we should be making sure that we do not leave behind. Why does an immigration reform in the US would need to include deportees and returnees, for example? Tell us about the reasons why they were deported and why they should be welcomed back and considered in such legislation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, first of all, I also wanted to say I'm really grateful to be here with all of you, people who are part of this moment of years of hard work and struggling. And I'm grateful we're having this conversation, although it comes with this mix of hope and anxiety. I just want to take note of that and celebrate the hard work, as Cesar said, of so many activists and advocates for years, and migrant families themselves, like Cecilia's and so many others. And in that, I think that it's really important on many levels. I was thinking, how can I say this in 3 or 5 minutes? But the deportees and returnees and unjustly denied asylum seekers, right, are sort of this population that I think there's an anxiety that could be left out or not adequately included in the approach under the new Biden administration, but needs to be, in part because I think Cesar and Cecilia alluded to just the need for reparations and for justice based on policies under Clinton, Bush, and Obama that led to the Trump escalation of anti-immigrant policies and violence. But I think that it's not a coincidence that deportees and returnees often come together and are also demanding for real, the structural changes because of this awareness that this was pre-Trump, right? So listening to those voices and taking into accordance those demands is also responding to the onus on the current administration and the current Senate to not leave the infrastructure for another Trump. in the future, to remake the broken immigration system, having learned from the profound violence and injustice that the current infrastructure lends it to based on discretion, right? Discretion is key. So for those people who have experienced deportation and return due to the threat of deportation, there's a lot of collateral damage around deportation when families are deported or someone's deported and the whole family returns with them. That can happen and happened under Obama and Trump due to, there's this, even under Obama and now, it remains to be seen how Biden navigates this, but there's this element that only the criminals should be deported. But many studies have shown that the majority of deportations in return are due to minor infractions like speeding tickets, immigration, outstanding removal orders, overstaying visas, and even those who are part of the criminal alien program and have been deported for decades are many times permanent legal residents, green card holders, right, who have DUIs, who have served sentences and are part of mixed status families. So as Cecilia pointed out, they have US citizen spouses, they have US citizen kids, they have DACA recipient kids, and they're being deported and basically experience exile for decades, if not life, for a sentence that their, US citizen, colleague, peer, neighbor, compa, basically dealt with for months or years to recover from. So that this is something that is not, we're really excited. I think it speaks to the power of this movement that it's on the table. Getting rid of the 1996 bans is on the table. I think that, and the other thing that I don't want to get into the policy stuff because I know Tran's going to talk about that. In addition to this need for repair and historical debt and justice is also what Biden likes to talk about, right? Building back better, in the sense that it was broken before, in the sense that, local chambers of commerce across the United States agree that legal immigration into their communities is good for the local economy, for local safety, for local well-being. And so it's also changing the narrative and getting us back to that in terms of just amplifying and expanding. And I think this is this historical moment, and this is our honest as part of the movement, is to really push for a ton of ways to legally migrate and to legally move, right? So both in terms of residency and in terms of mobility. And that's also part of the demands of deportees and returnees who are actually living here and there, have established families, and are actually looking not only, as Cesar said, not only to stay in the US, to go back home to the US in terms of welcoming back, but to be able to move back and forth legally and safely between many countries. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit more in the discussion. But with that, I'll leave it to whoever's next.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so true. We are having a conversation right now with Daniela Burgi from Blog, Jill Anderson from Otros Dreams, and Acción, Tran Dang from Rhizome Center for Migrants, Bill Hing from University of San Francisco, Cesar Vega, and we're talking about the how things are looking for asylum seekers, for returnees and deportees in the face of a change of administration in the United States, Mexico and US. I remember that Jill and I have always talked about this. Mexico and the US and Central America are more than neighbors. We're a family. We're connected by so many things. And the problem is that the political system still is not approaching with this perspective the problems of the region. We have one common root, and we share so many stories that the political system should be addressing the problems with this same perspective as a family. Tran, you also work with returnees and deportees in Guadalajara. Please tell us, what do you think that we need to do right now as citizens in the United States, in Mexico, as regional citizens, and what are organizations like yours doing, and what are you calling for?
Sure. And just to start, thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this conversation and a part of this important space. Thank you to Global Exchange for making this possible, and also to our interpreters, Ruth and Elena, for making it possible to transmit this conversation across borders where we are. Again, I'm the director and the founder of the Rhizome Center for Migrants. Our organization serves the returned and deported in Guadalajara, so in one of the regions of Mexico most impacted by deportation. Very quickly, we provide legal aid, humanitarian support, and advocacy. That means that we counsel individuals on whether and if they can return to the United States. We provide food aid and basic supplies to those who are really having a hard time surviving and getting back on their feet again. We also advocate for expanded institutional resources for those on this side of the border. At the same time, we work to improve human rights conditions in the region for everyone on both sides of the border. One of the things, and I just wanted to give some statistics just to give folks context for the number of people kind of affected by deportation. Mexico is the country most impacted by deportation. It has been historically. Today in Mexico, there are more deported spouses, children, and parents of US citizens than in any other country. There are more deported veterans, more de facto deported US citizens and children in Mexico than anywhere else. And there are also a growing number of deported non-Mexican US citizens, non-Mexican citizens living in Mexico. So that context informs kind of our perspective. And being on this side of the border, we really have a broader view of the issue and understanding of the stakes involved in immigration reform. When President Biden announced his immigration plan 2 weeks ago, he made family unity the guiding principle of his immigration proposal. But he limited that to those who had been deported under Trump. For us, access to family unity is a fundamental basic right that cannot be tied to a specific moment in time. Lives remain in limbo, and we're interested in uniting the deported loved ones with their families, regardless of who deported them. In response to the president's immigration plan, we submitted policy recommendations to broaden the scope of people who can benefit from immigration reform in the United States. And keeping in mind the specific circumstances that Jill talked about that are currently keeping families apart. And so in the interest of time, I'll just go over some of the key proposals that we've made that would achieve true family unity. One of those includes allowing any US citizen child to be able to petition for their parent instead of waiting until a child turns 21. There's so many parents of US citizens on this side of the border who are still waiting to unite with their children, and that alone would benefit so many on this side of the border and in this region. As Jill mentioned, it's extremely difficult for those who have been returned or deported to return to the United States, even for a day. People are often denied humanitarian parole to return to the United States to say goodbye to dying loved ones. One of our asks is that consular officers be directed to view family unification as a positive factor in visa applications, whether immigrant or non-immigrant. And by non-immigrant, I mean tourist visa. We're also asking for discretionary relief for those who do have a criminal record, for those who are victims of mass incarceration in the United States and mass criminalization of migrants in the United States. We're asking for a second chance. the offenses sometimes are minor, sometimes are drug related or otherwise nonviolent. And we're looking for discretionary relief so that those who fall into that category still have an accessible pathway to return to the United States to be with their loved ones. We're also asking that the immediate beneficiaries under any immigration plan include all those who have been separated, not just those who have been separated under the Trump administration. As Cesar and Jill pointed out, millions have been impacted by deportation. In the last 10 years alone, over 3 million have been deported, and they are still looking to get back to the United States to be with their loved ones. In terms of what you can do to help and what we should be doing to support people who have been returned and deported, support these policy asks. You can include them in your educational materials. You can include them in your campaign strategies. You can include them in your legislative meetings. We can do better than simply just rolling back bad Trump policies. As Cesar said, it's a time to be bold and to include the millions who are not currently in the conversation. Let's find them a seat at the table. And I encourage all those to check out our open letter online, and you can see kind of all of our specific proposals on our website, both in English and Spanish.
Thanks, Tran. Please share with us the link to your website on the chat on Zoom, and we'll also share it on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Thank you for having a conversation on asylum seekers, deportees, and returnees in the face of the change of the administration. So many things that we can say about that. But let's go with Professor Bill Hing. Professor, I wanted you to be the last one because, as one of the most experienced in the panel, after listening to all the stories and all this proposals, yes, proud experienced men. After listening to all these ideas, all these proposals, we wanted to, ask you, do you really think there's an opportunity to move this agenda forward? Is this a time to rest? Is this a time to or is this a time to fight even more harder than what Trump was in power? What are the difference between the previous attempts to do something like this, where we've seen failure after failure? Please.
What a challenge, Marco. Of course, it's not a time to rest. But why do you leave me to be the one to perhaps throw a little bit of water on these possibilities?
Please do.
I will
this
try to be hopeful.
We need to tell.
Okay,
yeah.
I gotta get my head around this because I gotta get my hopeful hat on. So let me start with what we need to do. Okay, what we need to do is convince 10 Republican senators to support all of this. Okay, that's our audience. Our audience is 10 Republican senators. You can look at it many other different ways. Our audience is Joe Biden, our audience is Nancy Pelosi and that kind of stuff. But if you want major legislation enacted, which I agree with all the proposals that we put on the table. Listen, my clinic is representing 450 asylum seekers, mostly from Central America and Mexico. My clinic represents people in detention who have been long-term permanent residents who committed what we would consider a minor offense that's considered an aggravated felony. I mean, yeah, we want all this. We want legalization. But in order to get legislation passed in the Senate, you need 60 votes unless the filibuster rule is changed. And I don't think they're going to do it for immigration legislation. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what we need to do. Okay, so here's what we would be left with. And I'm going to go down a dark road, okay, and then I'll try to come back up with some light. Here's what we're going to be left with if we cannot get legislation passed through the Senate. We're going to be left with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris trying to implement a series of executive orders that include an expansion of DACA. He's going to try to do what Obama tried near the end of his administration, which is the DACA plus, right? And DAPA, Deferred Action for Parents of American Citizens, probably Deferred Action for Dreamers. Here's the challenge. The challenge is a place called Texas. That is the challenge. The challenge is an attorney general in Texas. He is challenging everything, all right? And his first court is a friendly court. His first court, as we saw just last week in getting a preliminary injunction, or at least a temporary restraining order against the 100-day moratorium, he's got friendly federal judges in Texas. And the problem is if Biden tries an expanded deferred action program, it's going to be sued by Texas. They're going to bring an action against that. And then above that, I'm going to try not to be technical, is another court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They're just as bad as the federal judges in Texas. And so the test will be the Supreme Court. And the last time the Supreme Court heard an issue like this was not in June, okay? June was a different kind of challenge on DACA. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is in 2015, when the Supreme Court only had 8 members. And at that time, when the Supreme Court only had 8 members, they could not decide whether or not DAPA, the Deferred Action for Parents of American Citizens, was proper or not. And so they left it, they tied 4-4. And so they left it to the Fifth Circuit decision, which ruled that DAPA was not proper. Well, guess what? What's happened since then? The balance of the court has changed. It's 6-3 now against us, okay? And so I worry a lot about whether or not even an executive action which would expand to include the kinds of individuals that we know should be included, whether or not that would even pass muster at the Supreme Court. So what do we need to do about this? Somebody earlier introduced themselves as being active during the Sensenbrenner legislation. And so many of you are children compared to my age, okay? You have to think back to May 1st, 2006. On May 1st, 2006, people took the streets. They closed down freeways in Los Angeles, in San Jose, in Manhattan. That's what we need to do. We need to be heard in order for not just an executive action, but yes, we need to go after the big ticket items. And the only way to do it, I think, is this constant in your face. We saw a glimpse of that this summer in the United States after the killing of George Floyd. We need that constant action on behalf of immigrants, because this is not going to be handed to us. We are in a war. We are in a war with people like Ted Cruz, like Marco Rubio, Mitch McConnell. We are in a war with the Republicans who don't want immigrants of color. This is a racial issue, and we've got to remind people of that. And otherwise, we're going to be saying, thank you, Joe Biden, for expanding TPS, because TPS is the only thing that Joe Biden has a statutory authority to do. I'll just drop a quick footnote here too on the proposed legislation and the executive order yesterday. There's also hope with the language of them opening refugee centers in Central America, because if they do that, implicit in opening refugee centers is that Joe Biden actually might designate a large number of refugees from Central America, which would be the first time in history since the passage of the 1980 Refugee Act that a president actually designated substantial numbers for refugees in Central America. If he did that, that's a game changer. He has the statutory authority to do that. And he can do that without Republicans. And so, but that's the only thing he can do. by statute. That and TPS. Everything else we have to fight for. So my final statement on this is, let's shut down this Zoom call and take to the streets.
There you go. Thank you, Professor Bilbo, thinking and talking to us not only as an academic, but as someone who knows that these are lives. These are lives that are at stake. We are talking to a very special panel about the political landscape that we have in front of us right now with the change of administration and its impact on asylum seekers, deportees, and returnees. Cesar, so as someone who knows from reality that no right is going to be given, no right is going to be a gift, that knows that this one is a fight, that knows that Democrats can turn their back on immigrants also. What would be your message on what's next?
Well, I think Dr. Hing is absolutely correct. This isn't a given, but my role as an advocate for my community on both sides of the border isn't to look at what is politically viable. It's to look at what the community needs and what the community is saying that we need to achieve. I remember in 2010, being in a dorm room in UCLA after I was forced to withdraw my my acceptance, because at that point there was no financial aid for undocumented students in the University of California. That morning, I saw 5 Democrats vote against cloture for the DREAM Act. One of them didn't even show up to vote. So it was 6 Democrats that saved the DREAM Act in 2010. We know the stakes. And I think we know that the political reality is stacked against us. But now I'm seeing Democrats unanimously support the DREAM Act. I'm seeing 200 plus House representatives sponsor immigration legislation without deportation or detention funding. I am seeing the momentum in our favor. And I think what we need to do now is not just take to the streets. I think we need to be visible, we need to be loud. But my community here in Mexico can't take to the streets unless the street, you mean maybe Friendship Park in San Diego, right? And there's millions of us who can't be on the streets in the districts to influence legislators. But what we can do as an advocacy community is people can open the door. They can reserve a seat at the table for deportee-led organizations and asylum organizations around the world to have a stake and a voice in this, because we are not in the place we are right now because we gave up in 2010 when 6 Democrats decided to kill the DREAM Act. We didn't give up when the Gang of 8 bill didn't move in the House. We didn't give up even when there was a division among advocates themselves as to whether the Gang of 8 was acceptable because of the billions of dollars it had for deportation and detention that would hurt our communities. We are smarter now. We have seen the possibilities. And I go back to the work that the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance, the Immigrant Youth Coalition, and others have done to push the envelope and say, you know what? We can kick ICE out of our jails. We can have a conversation about why people are in the jails in the first place. And we talked a little bit about double jeopardy and why immigrants are punished twice for offenses that other people aren't punished at all if they're affluent and in the right neighborhoods. But we haven't had a conversation between, for example, advocates for depenalization of drug offenses with the migration context. We haven't had a conversation about how immigration, detention, and deportation are mass incarceration. We're in Black History Month, and there are amazing advocates working with Black undocumented immigrants in the US, like Baji, like UndocuBlack, like Haitian Bridge. And we still haven't discussed how police violence is also deportation. I think for us, it's a very simple and clear ask. We have to imagine, and we have to begin to educate legislators and our own community and our own advocates about what's at stake. Who are the people who are actually affected? Because if you had told me that I would one day be asking for the waiver of the 3 or 10 year bars or the permanent bars in some cases for people who've been deported, I would have told you it was a crazy idea. For me, it doesn't seem easy, and maybe it doesn't happen in the first 6 months of a Biden administration, but it has to happen. We have identified it now as a need in the community. And again, the call would be to join us in efforts like this open letter. This was historic. We had binational organizations. There were organizations in Germany who signed on because we're seeing for the first time, I think, in a very long time, that the migration context touches so many issues that we've all been working on in silos. And if an organization in the US holds the door open for someone like the Rhizome Center, for someone like ODA in Mexico City, to speak to legislators, to speak to other advocates, that is how we win. Because I don't want to be back in 2010 in a dorm room planning my self-deportation for the first time, like I did when the DREAM Act failed, because I felt that that was the end, right? Whatever happens with this round of legislation, we have to build on that. And if we win the first time, that would be incredible. But I'm willing to take my lumps and I'm willing to keep working, but I can't do it alone. I need organizations on the other side of the border to keep the door open for me so I can walk in behind them, even if it's just through a Zoom call like we're doing today.
Thank you very much, Cesar. Please bear with us. This is a very important conversation. If we go a little bit beyond the hour, I think this is a unique opportunity, and we are approaching conclusions, but still have to hear some important words. Daniela, please, do you have the names of the 10 Republicans that we need to convince? Those 10 Republicans that Bill was talking about? No, but beyond that, what is it that we are facing in Washington right now to get this legislation passed? Can you hear us? Oh, I think that Daniela is frozen. Can you hear us? Yeah. Okay. Well, what's your comment on this, Jill? Please tell us. What is the future that the Biden administration is facing if they don't listen to what millions of people are demanding, not only across the Mexico-US border? Oh, here's Daniela. Let me just get back to her. Can you hear me, Daniela?
Yes, sorry, Marco.
Did you hear my question?
No, I didn't.
Okay, I asked you if you had the names of the 10 Republicans that Professor Bill says that we need to convince. No, but more than that, if what is it that we're facing in Washington right now for the next month?
Yeah, so I think Professor Hing is absolutely right, but let's take to the virtual streets. So there is actually a lot that we can do. I think we should pressure and target our actions towards the Biden administration. The reality is we haven't seen the text of that immigration bill yet, and it is kind of extremely ambitious and comprehensive. So we don't know what that's going to look like in the end. So what we can do right now is target the Biden administration on a number of fronts. We as LOG have a petition right now that we would love your support on. It is directly to President Biden to halt the expulsions going on at the border. So right now, I saw a question in the chat about kids in cages. Well, the reality on the border has been that people haven't even been getting in, right? Because they've just been getting turned back around to Mexico, families and children, or flown directly from the border to Central America. There's no processing. That policy was put in place by the Trump administration in March as with the excuse of the pandemic. And kind of all of the other policies on the border depend on that policy being withdrawn. So, and the administration basically has the power to withdraw that policy. Right now, it's only said that is in the process of reviewing it. So I'm going to drop the link to that petition in the chat. We are going to deliver it, maybe do another sort of IG or Facebook Live around what's been happening on the border to people and why it's so important that we end this policy. But that's the kind of public support, public demonstration that we can send to the administration virtually and saying that we are opposed to this policy. So I would love to get your support, everyone's support in sharing that petition. The other actions, I think there's a lot of members of Congress that are writing to the Biden administration a lot of specific issues. Sometimes we find out about those letters and sometimes we don't. Sometimes the letters are private and sometimes they're public. But members of Congress are writing those letters. For example, we have a letter that we found out about the Representative Velasquez is writing to asking DHS and the State Department to grant TPS for Central Americans that were impacted by the hurricanes. Again, as Dr. Hing said, TPS is not a permanent solution, but there are things that the administration can do in its first few steps and first few days in office, and it just kind of needs public pressure to move that forward. We've seen the first few steps in executive orders, but we really need to get some of these other actions moving, and the only way they're going to do that is if they hear not just from advocates in DC, not just from advocates somewhere else, but from the general public telling their member of Congress to raise that issue with the Biden administration, or the Biden administration getting really, calls, getting petitions, getting actions on social media, pressuring them, really kind of, maybe not shaming them, but alerting them to the fact that people care about this issue. So, we saw the results in 2018 of the mass protests around the separation of families. And again, that's something that also the Biden administration has committed to, is reuniting those families that were separated. The only reason that that's happening is, again, the continuous work that advocates have done on the ground since 2018, since the Trump administration implemented the policy. And for me, it was really amazing to see when we had thousands of people across the country protesting family separation, which is not really, these are families arriving at our border. It's not an issue that, and again, we're hearing on this live that, family separation happens across all different areas and across different communities, not just the families that are arriving at our border. And we heard from Cecilia directly how she was impacted by that. But how do we connect these issues and really raise them and bring them to the forefront? So I would absolutely say prioritizing right now is raising these issues with your member of Congress. If you think there's a Biden administration can do something right now, then tell your member of Congress, your senator, your representative to write a letter or to say that directly to the White House, because they need to hear from people. Sign up for log alerts. We're putting out an alert tomorrow on the TPS letter. We'll keep you informed if there's an action you can take. And then the other kind of key action is that probably in the next month or so, we're going to be hearing from President Biden on his first budget. And that's just a proposal of his budget. Congress is in control of the budget. Congress has the control to the purse strings of the US, right? So that's going to be another key moment to get members of Congress to react to that budget, and for us to say what it is that we want to see in that budget, in a budget for the people. And a way that one of our audience members asked about kids in cages, a way to make sure that doesn't happen is to cut the funding for ICE and CBP. And so that's another concrete action that we need to be educating ourselves about. What are those principles that we want to see in that budget for next year under a Biden administration that the Congress can move forward? So I'll just leave, those are a couple of ideas in terms of actions.
Thank you very much. There is close to 100 people watching us live. And so if you help us, we can make this a virtual action. So please check the link on your chat and sign the petitions and sign up for alerts. And please, I'm going to ask the team at Global Exchange Production to help us sharing these links on Facebook, on Global Exchange, so that people can sign also them on that platform. So thank you very much, Daniela. That's really important to hear the specific avenues that we have right in front of us. Jill, if we're not afraid, and feel free to not respond to my question if you want to talk about something else, but if we're not afraid to be pessimistic and exploring the scenario of this not moving forward as to where we want to be or where we want to go, what do you think that the Biden and future U.S. administration will be facing if they continue to avoid this matter? What does the future looks like without recognition of immigrant communities and our transnational family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I want to second what Cesar was saying about, sharing the open letter, which I think is historic and vital at this moment, and share and opening the door to organized communities who are in exile, deported, returned, denied asylum, not only in Mexico. They're organized Cambodians, they're organized Vietnamese, they're organized, and I think that is an important action point at this point, and we are so grateful for having that being a part of this conversation to the extent that we are. And I hope that that continues with the fact, and this is maybe I'll get to your point. I don't know if I want to go there because it's so dark, and I'm just so happy not being in that place as of 3 weeks ago, but at least not to the same extent. But what I really and listening to Bill and listening to all of us at this moment, I really feel like part of what, as we're all, I think, with years of being a part of this movement in our lives, in our work, in our labor, this is a moment where I hope that as a movement, we can really begin to coalesce around key demands that are coming from the directly affected communities by basically a program of illegalization, right? All of this migration, illegal immigrants are created by the laws. And we need to get really clear on that. And we need to do away with any demands for discretion. I am all for TPS. I am all for DACA. I was all for DAPA. But discretion is not going to solve this and is not going to address the needs. And not only the needs of migrant families, also the needs of societies in general. This maybe gets to your question, Marco. I am a part of this movement, not only because I feel identified as a friend, family member, and ally and co-conspirator, but also because I believe that the illegalization of human beings is in line with the history of slavery in the United States. It is part of the arc of justice. It is part of the system of capitalism. And if we keep going down this path, we exploit our planet and we exploit the people in it. In this current moment, it is immigrants, as before it was slaves. If we keep going down this path, we don't have a planet to live on because we live in a system of exploitation. So we're talking, that's where, the intersectional movement is there. And I feel like we're on the cusp of having the language to really articulate it in a way that the stakes are so clear. I hope and I imagine that at some point, hopefully if not in my lived experience, in my children's or grandchildren's, that illegalized immigration will be looked down upon with the same sort of disdain and rank as chattel slavery. It will be seen as a system for exploitation of human beings that was inhumane and violent to the same extent. And that, I think we got to get clear on that. We're not looking for reform. We're not looking for discretion. We're looking for a system that stops exploiting human beings alongside the exploitation of our planet, right? So that's sort of the hopeful side of the very dark picture if we keep going down this path as a society and as a region. And as I know Rhizome Center and many other organizations in Mexico and around the world, we see this as a global, regional, bi-national, transnational issue. This is not limited to the US government by any means, but that's for another Zoom call. So.
Thank you very much, Jill. Tran, please help us with a call for action. What's next? And then we'll close with Professor Bill Hing.
Sure. Again, my perspective is really informed by where I am. I live in Mexico. I support those who are directly impacted by US immigration policies. And I think that it's really time to acknowledge the toll of anti-immigrant policies on millions of people across this region and really across the world. We have to stop deporting adopted children of US citizens. We have to stop deporting parents, spouses, and children of people in the United States. I think that, we're doing everything that we can on this side of the border to elevate the voices of those who are not part of the conversation, but we know that they do have US citizen family members and legal permanent resident family members in the United States who can speak up, who can contact their legislators, and we hope that they do kind of enter this fight and be a part of this lucha with us. I know that there are so many people who've lost neighbors, so many immediate family members who no longer have the benefit of, for example, their U.S. citizen children to take care of them in old age. And so the impact of deportation policies in the United States has a much far-reaching impact than what we talk about. Typically, so many communities are invisible, and I really hope that that we can shine a light on those communities this time around.
Thank you very much, Tran. Professor, let me just read a question from the public. Thank you for this powerful discussion. Can panelists talk about work to address causes of forced migration? I noticed that the executive order issued yesterday say absolutely nothing, not a word about the U.S. weaponry exported or trafficked to Central America and Mexico that is making life unsustainable in so many communities. You don't have to respond to this, Professor, if anyone else wants to respond to it, but we would like to hear your final remarks.
Yeah, well, just on that point, the fact that they are going to invest, they would like to invest, the Biden administration would like to invest in Central America. I learned this from a call earlier with your colleague, Ted Lewis, Marco, that we got to talk about guns and weapons in those areas for sure, as part of the root cause. But so I'm going to repeat myself on the 10 votes. 10 U.S. senators that we need, Republicans. We learned we need a Stacey Abrams, okay? And this is what I mean. We saw what happened in Georgia, right? A coalition of progressives and voters of color, they came together and they delivered a majority, helped to deliver a majority in the Senate. We saw a similar thing happen in Arizona. There are 2 Democratic senators in Arizona now. We need somebody smart, way smarter than me, to figure out the politics of where and when where to target, what states should we target, and we should call on our friends in those states to help us mobilize and target particular senators on those states and show them that they risk losing their positions if they don't support comprehensive immigration reform.
Thank you very much. Does anybody feel like they want to respond on the guns issue? Cesar, please.
Sure. I think about this a lot. Being from Jalisco in Mexico is a state that has historically sent millions of migrants, right? It's one of the largest centers of migrations around the world. I think what we need to talk about when we think about forced migration, it isn't just the arms trade that is fueling violence, which is forcing people to flee. It is, what is that arms trade responding to? I look at countries like El Salvador and reports that have come out about water scarcity. How about one of the most densely populated countries in the world is close to running out of water? Mexico sent so many people to the United States that nearly 1 in 3 people who could claim Mexican citizenship live in the United States. The era of mass migration isn't over. It's beginning because of climate change, because of the violence that's generated by resource scarcity, because we have an immigration system that's based on racial restriction and national origin restriction, not on addressing the needs of people who are displaced by Canadian mining companies, by American petroleum companies, by the weapons companies, by Israeli technology companies that fund surveillance and have profited, all of them across multiple sectors, from essentially what's emerging as a system of global apartheid. So if we want to address that issue of mass and forced displacement, we have to do 2 things. We have to stop just talking about the right to migrate. We have to change our immigration system, absolutely, but we need to change the way we talk to each other so that environmentalists are looped into the conversations about migration and vice versa. Because if we don't, and this is sort of going back to your question of what is at risk if, or what is at stake if we fail, it's a world where millions more refugees are stuck in hyper-policed, hyper-violent countries along borders that are emerging faster than at any other point in history, essentially at the mercy of governments that we know look for any excuse and any opportunity to violate the rights of people who are displaced. And that goes for the United States, as it does for Mexico, as it does for every single country in this hemisphere and around the world. So to answer that question just very, very briefly, it's let's talk. Let's start collaborating. Let's build that intersectional cross-issue movement that we've been talking about for decades. Because if not, we're going to see bigger catastrophes. And I don't want to be here in 10 years talking about how we legalize another 11 million people.
Thank you very much, Cesar. Just to put a brief example, yesterday it was the Mexican government basically stated the state of Tamaulipas said that 12 police officers using US guns manufactured in the US, 6 hour, a US based manufactured, sold a little over 1,000 guns to the state of Tamaulipas between 2015 and 2019, according to a good friend, John Lindsay Poland. That's where those weapons ended, killing and ending the lives of 19 immigrants in the state of Tamaulipas. But there's a legal path to move arms around the region. And there's no, unfortunately, human beings are less than objects sometimes for our governments. So thank you very much. This has been a very amazing conversation with so many powerful ideas and calls for action. We need, as many of you have stated tonight, we need to stay together. We need to be bold. We need to stay strong, whether it's on virtual actions, offline, but we need to connect. We need to be the example of that society that is collaborative across borders. And this is the moment to do it. There's a bunch of actions. There's law calling us for signups and for the letter. There's the open letter also that Tran was talking about. And this is a moment to take the streets. This is a moment to talk to our friends. This is the moment to start to mobilize, because it's impossible to stop a wave of citizens from across the region saying enough is enough. We've seen hell in the past 4 years, and we know that there's no way to stop. We all know that sooner or later, we're gonna be together. The moment is, where do our leadership wants to be at in this moment of history? And it is us who need to tell them that we need them to be on the right side of history after everything that we've seen in the past 4 years. Thank you very much to each of you. And we hope that each one of the listeners here on Zoom and on Facebook become replicators of this good message. We have a petition on Global Exchange demanding justice for the 19 migrants that were killed in Tamaulipas. And so we'll see you on the next one. We will continue bringing this message to you. Thank you, Professor Hing. Thank you, Jill. Gracias, Daniela. Thank you, Cesar, Tran, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.